Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Liz Faust. I am the Chief Curator at Catalyst Contemporary, and today we're having an artist talk with the lovely Sobia Ahmad today. First off, we do currently have our represented artist show still up actually at the gallery called Authentic Realities, which Eric and Sobia and Damon are a part of. And this is our series of talks. The next one will be next Saturday with Damon at 3 p.m. as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So Sobia, we're just going to kind of jump straight into the questions and get started.
Okay.
Awesome. So for in Authentic Realities, you have two specific pieces. One printed on chiffon and one kind of these woven rice bags. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the process of making these, from not only in their construction, but also in your conceiving these ideals.
Yeah. So the work, Wherever You Are is Called Here, was born from a dream about my grandfather's rice fields that I kept having when I was actually working on another project. I was working on examining language found within the Supreme Court ruling on the travel ban that was placed in early January 2017. But I was at an artist residency and I kept having this vague image of a monochromatic rice field appear, and I wasn't sure what it was trying to tell me, but I kept it in the back of my mind, and I thought about that for a while, and kind of went back and forth just sketching the image, and didn't really understand it until like much later in the year in 2019. I started looking at Google Maps, my childhood home and my grandfather's rice fields, and sort of just examining the land and like the relationship of technology and land. And I started printing out all these screenshots that I took. I can show you some of, on a good day I would find the place, and on a not so good day I wouldn't. I would sort of zoom out and take images and weave them together, because I was really interested in exploring how geography and home were connected, and how there was these uncertainties in relation to geography and home for me. So I sort of just started thinking about the relationship of maps and place and land in relation to the idea of home, and what it meant to be here in the US in this very socio-political climate and not really feel at home at times. So the idea of home and here became really interesting, and I started exploring that through the lens of memory and place. So the installation Wherever You Are is Called Here, the anti-flags came together from weaving rice bags, because I started looking at my personal archives of images that I've collected of my childhood home, that I was able to visit over time, and also thinking about my ancestors and their connection with land that was severed, and how some of us who are immigrants or children of immigrants or refugees don't really have that symbiotic relationship with land, but we do have this like the things that we create with our hands have our stories embedded within them. And I wanted to replicate my ancestors' traditions of weaving, and the rice bags was the material that really spoke to me, because it was also part of my memory of cleaning rice with my grandmother in our home. So I actually constructed the flags, which I call anti-flags, with my grandmother, and also recorded her stories, which are part of the work, the installation. And the second work on chiffon is actually an image of the ancestral village where the rice fields are found. So I kind of, stitched together several images of that to mimic this vague image that I saw in my dream, but also thinking a lot about how I can convey this, feeling of inaccessibility through the really delicate chiffon. And, this material is translucent and it's not hemmed and it's very, easy to like fall apart. And I was thinking a lot about, how memory functions for us and how difficult it can be because oftentimes it is a very visceral experience.
Awesome. Um, so another question I have for you, Sobia, is what do you want viewers to take away from your work when they're visiting your pieces, when they're experiencing your installations, your videos? What do you want the viewer to walk away with?
Um, I don't really have a very specific, takeaway message for someone, but I really hope that they can take away the questions that are at the center of my work. I think a lot about the relationship between our, deeply intimate struggles of belonging and identity and how they can inform the larger conversations that we're having about national identity and our notions of home and cultural memory and heritage and gender. So I think because my work starts with a lot of these questions, I'm mostly hoping that the viewer can engage with those on a, you know, thoughtful and, intimate level.
Awesome. Um, and for those of us who are just joining real quick, just because I've seen a bunch of people pop in, today at Catalyst Contemporary, we're having a artist talk with Sobia Ahmad in relation to not only our exhibition Authentic Realities, but also her new representation at Catalyst, which is super exciting. So speaking
Yes.
of that, last summer we had you in our exhibition, I Know Where I've Been, which was a duo show with Sarah Boino. And there we really showed these multimedia black and white paintings that you did in 2016. Could you talk about how you've evolved from like that starting place into the work that you're making now?
Yeah. I think my work has evolved from being mostly 2D based to installation based and multimedia. The work that you mentioned from 2016 was a series of paintings that I was doing that started with very small collages that I was making by taking images that I found of minorities and women, and specifically, the Muslim community in the popular culture and media, and thinking a lot about how identities are politicized and also rendered like black and white in sound bites in the media, especially in 2016 around the presidential election. I was, hearing a lot about these reporting and news outlets sort of like people's identities being, like reduced to a soundbite in a way that didn't feel right. And also, I was thinking a lot about how that sort of creates our own understanding of self and vice versa, and how these larger power structures affect our relationship to identity, and how our self, our understanding of self sort of affects the way we deal with and engage with these larger power structures. So those collages sort of expanded into a series of paintings that were mixed media with a lot of fabric and cultural references in them. Um, but thinking about the evolution of my work, I feel like it's now taken, a new direction where I'm engaging with similar themes, but sort of weaving personal stories in, not just a personal and a community level, but also engaging with the national, political, and global, conversations around home and nationalism and borders.
Awesome. Um, Speaking of that and kind of your practice in general, you often work in multiples.
Hmm.
whether it be multiples in a series or multiple pieces in one piece, multiple components. Could you talk about perhaps how ritual kind of works not only in the end product but also in your process of making?
Yeah, I think a lot about ritual in various different ways. Like something that I really think a lot about is the idea of prayer and engaging in prayer as an act of ritual. Um, and I consider a lot of this work sort of an act of prayer in that way. But, whether it's just physically performing in public, an act of prayer, or is it like it's just weaving these rice bags together that seem to, you know, have that element of ritual with, like an engagement with your ancestral knowledge and mythic imagination. So, um, ritual for me is sort of ever shifting in that way. And I'm sort of coming at a very personalized understanding of, like reimagined rituals through a lot of my work. And since that shifts and changes and self is, ever evolving, I think I work and allowing myself to work in multiples and series helps me sort of like move through that process in a seamless way, but also just I can go back to certain works that were part of the, earlier works that were part of the series. And yeah, that's why I work a lot in diptychs and triptychs, but also sometimes a physical object that I make ends up being part of a video that ends up being part of an installation that tells a larger story. So I'm sort of trying to see how I can weave together various stories into one cohesive narrative.
Speaking of stories, can you talk a little bit about the various notions of home in your works?
Right. I think the concept of home is at the core of my practice. Everything I make really, comes down to that. Um, but in very different ways, home, not just, geographical home, but also, thinking about familial home and personal home and cultural home and spiritual home and the various shapes and, forms that takes for us. Um, as an immigrant, the idea of home for me is, like always comes with a sense of disembodied, feelings. And it isn't always actually about geography or, even though a lot of my childhood, like images from my childhood home appear in my work, but it's sort of just this reimagining and renegotiation of memory. Um, I think a lot about, home in the metaphysical realm and what that means. This like creating a sense of home within oneself, and what are some rituals or practices that allow us to access that. Um, Recently, nature has been that, for me, especially as we're sitting in this moment of uncertainty and social distancing. I'm really finding a sense of home in the woods. And that can look very different based on, these, you know, uncertainties that kind of like I see them as these rhythmic uncertainties that come in waves. Yeah, and I'm also really interested in how, home is really, tied to nationalism right now for a lot of us, or that's a conversation that's ever present, not just in the U.S. but globally. So home, I think, became the center of the work that's actually in the show at Catalyst Contemporary right now. Wherever you are is called here is very much about home because I was not only looking at my own, home on Google Maps and trying to connect with that and find the place that I can no longer access, geographically at least, but it also, became something through which I could explore this ancestral longing for home that I'm, considering sort of an inherited memory. Um, as I was making the work with my grandmother, I was actually needed her help to sew the rice bags together because I didn't know how to sew. And she, the moment she looked at the material, like memories of home came up for her. And, us together cleaning the rice in the courtyard of my childhood home came up. And when I asked her about her home, her childhood home, all these stories kept, flowing out of her that we had never heard about her childhood in India, which is on the other side of the border that she no longer can access. So in that moment, I kind of understood, this longing for home, not as just a personal journey, but also more so an ancestral longing. And that sort of connected with the, conversation that's happening in the US and globally, especially in India and Pakistan right now around, nationalism and hyper-nationalism and borders and sectarianism, which is why the work ended up taking the shape of flags, but I call them anti-flags because they're kind of, subverting the notion and function of what a flag is used for right now.
Definitely. A great question just came up from Zoe Charlton. Considering the political tenure of the country around ideals of nationality, what does belonging mean to you?
Oh, Zoe, that's a really good question. And I wish I had an answer. I really have come to the conclusion that it is a lifelong journey to understand what belonging means. At times it's really about, feeling connected to a community and having a sense of, belonging among people who will support you and, be there for you through, learning and unlearning. Sometimes belonging is about ancestral memories and ritual and mythic imagination in that way. And I don't really feel like belonging to me personally is about nationality or country of origin or place of birth. Um, it's ever shifting for me. It's kind of that elusive space that's, ever shifting and marked by unease. And, it's not about a location on a map. Um, it's about navigating those, really intimate struggles. I'm finding a lot of, sense of belonging in my own personal spiritual journey of sort of understanding myself through a lot of making. And I think just surrendering to tenuous meanings of home, you know, and knowing that it isn't a very easy or black and white answer.
Awesome. That's a good answer though. Um,
Thanks.
Speaking of like unease and making, um, can you talk about the elements of mythology and mysticism in your work that's incorporated not only in the end product, but as you said, in your process?
Right. Um, I, it's hard to really put into words this, experience of mysticism. I feel like it's these visceral experiences that we're all having are so hard to capture in language, and they're mostly felt. And I think mysticism is all around us in a way that um, it permeates everything we do and experience, yet we never really know how to give it language or articulate it well. Um, I personally am really interested in the idea of mythic imagination and not just thinking about myth as something that um, gives us stories or folklore, but really something that is very much a part of our realities, whether it's like socio-political or psychic or spiritual, and all those intertwining together. Um, I'm thinking a lot about, how ancestral imagination sort of can inform my understanding of, home and belonging in that way. Um, and also, an element of that appears in a lot of my, weaving because it felt like for me that was a way for me to connect with a ritual that my ancestors were engaged in. Um, Weaving has been part of my family and, our culture for a very long time that I never really learned. And I felt like my hands were hungry to like do something that my ancestors were doing. And it kind of felt like that was a way for me to enter that space through, like that repetition and act of what I consider just prayer in a way.
Awesome. Okay, my next question is, could you talk about your choice of your monochromatic kind of color scheme that you choose for a lot of your work? The black and white or clear, very clean, very minimalistic. Could you explain?
Oh, yeah. I think about how can I say the most with the least? How do I not over decorate something and let the materials be the message? And and that's not to say that the work is simplistic or it is minimalist in ways, but it's carrying a lot of thought and a lot of intention behind the choice of materials, which is why I use chiffon to convey some, like really delicate and intimate, feelings. And what I really enjoy about that is it's, it changes with the changes in light and air. So it's kind of like, referencing this like, impermanent feeling of home for a lot, for the things that I'm exploring. And then also because a lot of this work is coming from dreams. My dreams are in black and white. No one believes me when I say this, but it's true. I actually dream in black and white. And and it's kind of just very like vague in that way, and I kind of just let that be in the work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't really have like a lot to say about that. It's just that it just ends up being, the choice that I make to let the materials communicate what the work is trying to say. Yeah.
I definitely feel that that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Another question I have is, we talked about, we're in quarantine, so, are there one or two books that kind of influenced your practice or your ideals that you would suggest to people?
That's a really good question. I read a lot of poetry. I'm seeking shelter in poetry right now.
Mm-hmm.
And something that's been really speaking to me is I don't know if you've heard of Agha Shahid Ali.
I have not.
He was a Kashmiri American poet, and a lot of his work, engages with themes of, journey and exile and myth and politics and history and loss, and this those themes coming together, is really beautiful, and kind of I'm really interested by, like his work, and like I'm like really inspired by his work and interested in sort of like how the poetry like sort of like informs my practice in that way. I read a lot of John O'Donohue and David White. I read mystics a lot. That's something. Oh, Monroe said that just now. Yeah. I read John O'Donohue, David White, and the mystics, and really, Rilke is a really good influence. So poetry is really where a lot of, my work comes to be. Like sometimes I borrow titles from poems as well. In fact, Wherever You Are Is Called Here is from a poem, Lost by David Wagner, in which he talks about the idea of here as being an elusive space also, but in relation to a forest. But I thought that was really powerful. So yeah, I feel like I might have the book here somewhere. A Nostalgist's Map of America by Agha Shahid Ali. Mm-hmm. That's something I'm reading right now. And Khalil Gibran is someone that comes to mind. I really enjoy his work. Oh, also right now I'm reading a book called Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit. And she really talks about, she makes a radical case for hope as, something that will carry us through the darkness, which I really, connect with, especially now in this moment of, uncertainty for a lot of us. Hope can serve that, sort of beacon for not only social change, but also just moving through this sense of uncertainty.
Definitely.
What else am I reading? I feel like I can just go to my bookshelf. Oh yeah, this I actually picked up at a coffee shop. I was reading a book and I left mine there and just took this with me. It's
Yeah.
really good because it talks about how the arts, like on a grassroots level, can be the biggest catalyst for social change, which is something I'm um, thinking about in my work a lot. That is community based and social practice based.
So you talked about how you look at poetry a lot, and even kind of some of the titles as direct inspiration. So would you say that your work is poetry itself or commentary on poetry?
That's a really good question. Um, I wouldn't really say it's commentary or poetry. I think the act of creating is poetic. And I just kind of weave, language in my work a lot. And I think a lot of that ends up being, poems themselves. I, sometimes embroider poems that I've written, bits and pieces of, language that I've come up with as I'm trying to understand the work itself. So sometimes I embroider, poetry on chiffon and sort of like write it, repetitively. So I think the act of creating itself is poetic in that way. Yeah.
Awesome. There's a request to repeat the title of the last book.
Oh, Zoe, you'd love to hang out at my bookshelf. This one. Is this Grassroots
Grassroots
Leadership
leadership.
and the Arts for Social Change? It's a really good book, and it talks a lot about and it gives all these ways that really grassroots.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
There you are.
can you hear me now?
Welcome back.
Oh, sorry. Internet. Yeah, so this gives a lot of examples of how grassroots arts organizations and communities have used, art for social change in a lot of communities worldwide, from, Latin America to, Palestine. Yeah.
Speaking of communities, you're currently based in DC. Is your location kind of important to the conversations that you're having in your work, compared to where you're from or somewhere else in the country? If you could talk a little bit about that.
That's also a good question. I sit a lot with that, feeling of just being in DC at times. DC is such an interesting place to be. Especially like around this 2016 until now. It's kind of been a great place to do research and be around like-minded artists who are engaging in work that has themes of social change and social justice and social practice embedded in it. I would say that around 2017, when I was exploring, the immigrant experience against the backdrop of the travel ban, especially the anti-Muslim rhetoric in the U.S., it was imperative to be here. And I was collaborating a lot with local organizations doing work with immigrants and refugees and trying to repeal the ban. So that was important. And every time I showed my work, Small Identities, in galleries, I requested to hold an event around that work specifically, where I invited the community, like people who are not part of the art world or people who don't really normally engage with art in that way, or are not, in communication with art as a tool for social change, kind of, became really interesting because I could reach out to these organizations that were doing the work on the ground here in DC and invite them to be part of that conversation and create a space for people to, share not just food together, but also stories and sit with each other. So I like doing these closing receptions, especially around that work. And it was really helpful to be in DC for that. a lot of advocacy groups were involved in that work and still are, and just collaborating with them has been really rewarding.
Speaking of collaborations and kind of looping back to what you mentioned earlier, working with your grandmother, do you have any future projects that you have planned that you're going to make with her?
I do actually. Unfortunately, it's on a hold right now. I am learning how to weave from her, and weaving not in the traditional sense where I use thread and weave tapestries, but really um, functional objects that were very much part of my upbringing and my childhood home in Pakistan. So her and I are sort of weaving the beds that we would sleep on. So I'm thinking of you know accessing that ancestral knowledge and sort of weaving that into my own experience right now, and this like yearning for um, deep connection with ancestral knowledge in that way. And it's also something that I think is kind of like a personal journey, lifelong journey that kind of comes in and out of my work. And her and I are sort of thinking about it as a like knowledge transfer, and the art world may look at it as a work of art, but for me, it's much more than that. So I'm planning a collaboration with her around that, but that has like various parts to it, and a lot of fabrication involved that I can't really do right now since we're in social distancing. Um, and I'm recording a lot of her stories, a lot of her memories of migration from India to Pakistan, and a lot of that information isn't really publicly shared because it is quite traumatic. So I'm sort of like sitting with all these stories and trying to understand their relevance to the moment we are in right now, how the past, affects the present and the future, and how this, cyclical understanding of time can help us sort of, um, think about the issues that are, around us right now, nationally and globally and
Definitely.
personally.
Definitely. Yeah, I find that the element of time is your works are they're timeless, but at the same time they're timely and full of just time and reminding us of our mortality, especially your chiffon pieces. Because one of your artist statements that you wrote a while ago about one of the chiffon pieces was that the chiffon is not meant to last forever.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not archival. It will slowly kind of devolve just like our own bodies. So there's something very kind of memento mori about your chiffon pieces, which I think goes really well with the concept of home and here being so ephemeral that it's really most of the stuff that we interact and experience is ephemeral in effect. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, we haven't really talked about any of your video work. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good segue to kind of talk about some of the newest videos that you've made.
Yeah, I so I guess I'll speak a little bit to this idea of impermanence. I think that's that's really intimate for me because it's kind of something I'm always thinking about, like how like I'm not who I was a week ago or like a month ago. We're here, and the idea of here being something that can be a momentary state of mind. It can be the fraught socio-political realities. It can be a location on map. It's just here is just like ever shifting thing, and it's elusive and something. Like chiffon allows me to really convey that sort of impermanence. That's like the sense of, longing that can, dissolve and disintegrate and like make room for something new. So that's why I tend to use chiffon in that way. And what was the question about the video?
Kind of any new video works that you're kind of working on, or because part of your rice flag piece is also has an element of sound. as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just these woven black and white flags with
Mm-hmm.
maps and stuff. It also has a sound element.
Mm-hmm. Um, right now, at like in this very moment, because I'm going to Rock Creek Park a lot. I'm just trying to, stay in nature and engage with that. I'm witnessing time in a way that's really different than my normal routine. So I'm just sitting by the water a lot and thinking a lot about cyclical time and just, being witness to time in that way. So I'm recording a lot of that and also thinking about how mysticism plays a role in a lot of our, relationship and connection with nature and land itself. And one of my recent works is actually a collaboration with an artist and a friend, Monroe Eisenberg. It's a performance piece we did of walking in a circle. And we're really thinking about ritual and, reimagined ritual and the idea of intimacy and connection with land in that way. Um, and then a lot of times video for me doesn't all just stand alone as a work of art, but it becomes part of a larger installation. Another one that comes to mind is me reciting a found poem, which is the language from the Supreme Court ruling on the travel ban, juxtaposed with the sounds of water that I've collected from the internet of the Mediterranean, sort of, bringing together this language that is sharp and wounding with, histories of migration in the U.S. So I think of video as not my, like just a medium that is part of, my work. It really is just like a tool for me to convey things. I'm also thinking about, um, video itself as sculpture,
Mm-hmm.
and video itself is creating a space. So when I do have, show video, it kind of ends up, becoming an architectural element to the work. Yeah.
Awesome. So before I ask my next question, quite a few people have joined and left and joined. Just a reminder, I'm Liz Faust, Chief Curator at Catalyst Contemporary, and we're talking with the lovely Sobia Ahmad. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them out. We will get to them when we get to them. Okay, so make sure you ask some questions. The next question I have for you, Sobia, is in regards to kind of what's going on right now, with the pandemic and self distancing and self isolation is kind of has it inspired? You were talking about you went to the woods a lot. Has it inspired anything else that you're thinking about, perhaps in the future, either continuing? Like whether it be a daily practice or like an actual production method, or ideal and conceptually wise.
Hmm. Um, yeah, right now I feel like everything interrupting, my practice was almost like a blessing in disguise. It's kind of giving me time to sit with, oh, well, a lot of, things that I haven't paid attention to in the past, or at least projects that have been on hold, but also just spending time by myself has been incredible, kind of like finding myself at a threshold in my practice and realizing, the direction that I want to head in. Um, so I'm actually thinking of ritual a lot. And it's Ramadan, and it's really strange and bizarre to be isolated because it's such a communal experience, and to be going through that alone is also a challenge that I'm learning a lot from. It's just the beginning, but I'm just already thinking about what does it mean for me to be in isolation in a moment like this, when we're all really longing to be in community in that way. Um, and also thinking about how can I reimagine some of the rituals that ground me and, connect with that in my own personal language. So I think there's a lot happening, in the studio that is really unresolved, but it's a good place to be. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, it's definitely been challenging. Good in some ways, bad in a lot more. Um, Another question that just popped up, not in the comments, but do you want viewers to be politically kind of inspired to seek change and activism from your work?
Um, if the work inspires them to, work and, get involved in activist issues, then yes, totally. For me, first and foremost, it is a way for me to understand myself. The work for me is, you know, not just raising awareness about, a political issue. It is about how does this affect my understanding of self, you know? And I think because the personal and political overlap in, various ways, it is inseparable, right? Like something that is deeply intimate to me can also be, and is a political reality, right? So things, and vice versa. So I really hope that viewers can, see the power of art in raising awareness about issues of social justice, and but also, um, yeah, I hope it inspires, people to act and, take action in certain ways. I can remember when I first shared my work, Small Identities, a lot of people told me that they personally don't know an immigrant, but the work has sent chills down their spine, and they would ask me if there's an organization that I know where they can donate or volunteer. And I felt like art was such a powerful way to engage in that conversation, where we cannot, reach people otherwise. Art can do that. Yeah.
Definitely, I agree.
Thanks.
So another question, throwing a lot of questions at you. Uh, do you have what I call art inspiration? One or two artists who, just kind of really similar to the books that inspire your practice? Are there any specific artists that do that?
Hmm. Um, right now I'm thinking a lot about Ronnie Horn. I really like her, work, especially, in Iceland, and the way she engages with, you know, materiality and elements. Um, I'm also really inspired by Mona Hatoum's work and, her installation work and video work. Right now, I'm looking at a lot of female artists. So thinking about, not just like, how overtly we can, like engage in work that is feminist, but also just how that is just part of the work subtly in a way. Lorna Simpson, I'm looking through her, I gave myself a birthday present last year of her really thick book, and it's just kind of, it was really expensive, but it's good to have her in the studio because she really, her conceptual photographs are incredible. So, looking through a lot of her work right now. Um, yeah, those are ones that come to mind. And I feel like there is somewhere again on my bookshelf is this catalog I keep going back to from a show I saw. Between two rounds of exile, between two rounds of fire, the exile of the sea. This was a great show I saw at the Katzen Museum a couple years ago, and it's Arab modern and contemporary works from the Barjeel Art Foundation, and it's really, like, really incredible work around, themes of geography and exile and, history and myth and home. So all the artists in there are incredible. I think Manhotum's also in here. Yeah.
Another question that we actually had last talk that ties in really well is how do you see your work relating to the other two artists that Catalysts are representing, Eric Antonio Benitez and Damon Arhos?
Eric and I were talking the other day, and I think we have so much in common around our interests in mysticism, myth, materiality, and sort of like just engaging with, but also transcending issues of identity, that are sort of just reduced to, nationalism or like nationalist identity or like country of origin. And so I see a lot of, those overlaps in the way we engage with the material in that way. Damon's work is, also engaging with identity in a way that's, very present for me. And also he, the way the way we all approach, our own realities and like what's real to us is different, but also, there are a lot of overlaps in that, even if the materials don't really intersect. Yeah.
And another question and related to that is, even though you live and work in DC, you've signed with us a gallery here in Baltimore. So, kind of, what are you looking forward to the possibilities in Baltimore?
I really like the community of artists in Baltimore. I feel like there's not to say anything about DC, that's not what this means. I really mean, they're really open-minded and like welcoming and authentic, and I really enjoy that. So I'm really looking forward to connecting with people because being in DC, I've sort of formed my community and I feel at home, but I feel like I haven't really been able to connect with a lot of artists in Baltimore in that way. So I'm really looking forward to that. And also there's just like a lot of rich, like, amazing art coming out of Baltimore that I'm excited to engage with further. And just being closer to the BMAs, also nice. Yeah.
Definitely. Would be, kind of
Oh,
excited
Baltimore
whenever.
loves me. I love Baltimore and you, Zoe. Thank you.
So, I guess we should call for any final questions in the comments for Sobia. And while we wait for people to type, is there anything that you want to tell people today, whether it be about the show, the pieces, or your practice in general?
I guess it's not about my practice in general, but I just really hope everyone is, able to in some way be present to the moment we're in. Not to sound preachy, but it's really, I hope the world is going to be very different after this. I keep having dreams about portals that we have to walk through, and I really hope we walk through them. And I'm curious to see what this is going to mean for the creative community and the art world, and how it's going to, change our approach to the work we make, and also how we, what we see art and its role as in society at large. Yeah. And just being present to grief is also something that's been on my mind and something I'm, moving through and having a lot of these conversations with people and friends. And it's good to have that sense of, community and with that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I find that here in the States, that definitely our approach to grief and grieving is very different from the rest of the world. The fast pace of everything, just you're expected to just kind of jump back in immediately without taking that breath, without slowing down, without processing it.
Right.
And that's really problematic in a lot of ways. And so here's hoping that we learn not only to be healthier, cleaner, and better neighbors, but also that way we can take care of our own selves and emotions as well. I think that's been the most educational part for me, at least, during this, is like, oh, emotions. You gotta take care of that.
Right, exactly. And all of a sudden, it's like the rug was just snatched from underneath our feet in a way that we would never have done if given the option, right? We would have never opened ourselves up to this kind of, pace of life. And it kind of is it's a blessing in disguise in many ways, and it's painful in many ways too, right? Like, reflecting on the various privileges that we have, to be able to just sit and make work and have a roof over my head and have, enough money for now to feed myself is an incredible privilege. So, moving through gratitude in that way, but also realizing I am allowed to grieve a little bit, a sense of loss, but hopefully another beginning in some way.
Yes, and
Yeah.
definitely we're complex creatures. We can feel multiple emotions at the same time. Like, you're not allowed just one emotion.
Complexity.
That's definitely it. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Sobia, so much. This was amazing.
Thank you for having me. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Liz and Catalyst Contemporary, for organizing this. I hope you're all taking care of yourselves. And I look forward to connecting.
So just to wrap things up, this is Catalyst Contemporaries Talk with Sobia. Our next talk is next Saturday, May 2nd, with Damon Arhos at 3 p.m., same time, same place. Also, if you want to talk about, if you want to see the work Sobia was talking about today, you can go to her website or to Catalyst's and look under Authentic Realities tabs. But also make sure you sign up for our mailing list if you haven't already, so that way you get updates of our continuing virtual artist talks, which we will have a new roster soon. So thank you once again, everybody.
Oh, thank you. I'm looking at all these comments. You guys are great. Blessings and light to you, Alex, to all these hearts. Oh, thank you.
Of course, thank you. Yes, these talks are recorded. This one is being recorded on my iPhone. They will be edited, get the sound right, and then put hopefully on our Facebook and YouTube as well. So, awesome. Okay. Everyone, have a wonderful day. Stay safe,
Thank you.
stay healthy, and soak up some sunshine if you got some nice windows.
Bye, everyone.